if you see this, like just the skeleton, what do you think this is? But they don't seem that big.
with the largest specimens measuring up to 6 meters or
Never
20 feet
mind.
long.
Why do you have to travel like this?
If you're anything of a paleo nerd like me, then you probably have a few extinct animals that you
I'm
consider
not, but
favorites,
interested.
with each itching some part of your brain. And while all prehistoric animals bring their own charm and uniqueness, I do think it's fun to occasionally imagine what crazy beast you could cook up if you fuse your favorite prehistoric animals together, or
True.
combine them with a modern creature. And we've seen this done before in the Jurassic World franchise, with things such as the Indoraptor, Spinoraptor, and Stegoceratops. And I mean, even in the present, we've gotten a taste of hybrids. Kind of. As in biology, they are a real
liger?
thing, with them even sporadically happening in the wild.
But isn't this very bad for them? Like cross-breeding hybrid type of animals, they usually develop immune disease and just problems like gene defects or something like that. Isn't that what happened to pugs? Yeah, I feel like if you're not careful with it, there seems to be plenty of ways for it to go wrong. So the Jurassic World approach is probably what makes more sense.
But for the most part, a hybrid animals is generally the result of human influence. We just
Yeah.
can't seem to help ourselves. And this has led to animals such as mules, ligers, pumpards, wolpins, and the list goes on. And though we don't know of any true examples of hybridization in the fossil record, it does seem that Mother Nature on more than one occasion has given it a go, in a sense, as we have discovered bonker creatures that seem to have been straight up mashups between totally different animals.
What the fuck?
And one of the most striking examples of this has to do with a relic of the older Ice Age, the Chalicotherium. First appearing 33.9 million years ago during the Oligocene, this family of herbivores are amongst the strangest mammals to have ever evolved, but are also one of the less known extinct groups.
What?
And that is a downright shame, as they were in some ways a combo of two living animals that people love, gorillas and, horses. Yeah, not exactly a combination you'd expect to ever hear, let alone see, nor one.
Wait, really? Yeah, I can see the gorilla, but I don't see the horse part. I thought it was a gorilla and a tapir? I think that's how you spell it, T-A-P-I-R.
One you'd expect would work as well as it did. And taking a look at the Chalicotherium, it's not hard to see which part of them were the so-called gorilla or horse, as despite having a face and body that more resembles a horse, its limbs were long, powerful, and hoofless, with each having 3 functional fingers or digits instead. Now, obviously this family isn't a lost group of primates though, and nor were they horses, having belonged to their own separate group, which based upon classification studies, fell under the Parasodactyla order, with horses actually being considered their closest living relatives. And perhaps a reflection of this was their faces, which didn't only resemble a horse's, but also operated like theirs too, as it resulted in a diet of soft vegetation and seemingly muscular and prehensile lips that can in some ways function like a hand. And because its head was horse-like, it was also originally believed that these animals are grazers just like them, and thus likely inhabiting grasslands. But we now know that wasn't the case.
That's kinda cool.
And that has everything to do with those bizarre gorilla arms. Both the legs and arms of the Chalicotherium were overall long and strong, but it was the arms in particular that were proportionally giant and elongated. And in fact, just like a gorilla, Chalicotheriums got around by walking on their knuckles. And yes, this did make them slower than a horse, but these arms also allowed them to reach up and grab higher branches.
Oh, this kind of reminds me of giraffes a little bit. Their hands, their arms are long enough to pull down the branches. They're able to kind of stand or at least lean on the tree, so it seems, to feed on leaves up top. It's not as weird when you think about the functionality, because think about horses. They can only graze, right? Wouldn't they technically be safer doing this instead of grazing on an open field? So I feel like it's not as weird when I first saw it at a first glance. Yeah, it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool.
And then in addition to helping the Chalicotheriums get a snack in, each hand also came equipped with some pretty massive sharp claws that not only made their grasp stronger, but might have also come in handy with defense. As like gorillas, it has been speculated that Chalicotheriums swung their arms around with mighty forces in order to bash in any would-be attackers and competition. Something else that definitely helped their defenses further was that the Chalicotheriums were like gorillas and horses, in the sense that they were pretty chunky animals. Even the smallest members are about the same size as sheep, which sounds quite small, but I don't know if you ever picked one of those guys up, but they aren't that light, with them sometimes weighing more than a freaking jaguar.
So they're dense.
But then sheep size aside, you also had the giants of the family, like the Chalicotherium and Meropus, who could each stand 2.4 meters or 8 feet tall at the shoulder, making them taller than Shaq. And they were also far heavier than Shaq as well,
Oh,
with
they're
bigger
huge.
specimens potentially weighing over 1.1 tons.
What the fuck? So they're dense. I've never picked up a sheep. I've never even touched one. I think the only animal that I've touched myself, I can probably list them like right now. I've touched a dog, a mini horse, cats, squirrels, rats, birds. That's about it. That's about it. So yeah, I don't know much.
And during the Eocene, this made them one of the larger land animals around. And around they were, as they were found nearly everywhere, with the family spreading throughout Europe, Asia, Africa, and even North America.
Oh, wow.
And then with Asia in particular, especially being a hotspot for diversity. Based off the location of their fossils, it appears that they tended to reside within and around wooded areas, and do not seem to have been very gregarious creatures, despite being related to horses.
Well, like I said, being in the woods instead of in an open field, I feel like gives them the advantage of still being able to feed. Natural concealment beats nothing, right? And also being in a wooded area, what are they really competing against? I don't know what type of animals there were back then, but to me, it does sound like a unique advantage that they have.
As in nearly every formation they are known from, they seem to be quite rare in numbers, pointing to more solitary lives. But this seemed to work just fine for them, as along with other adaptations, Chalicotheriums would end up existing for a seriously long time, only dying out about 1 million years ago, give or take, and thus ending a dynasty of mammals so unique that it's almost impossible to directly compare them to any other one creature.
If you see this, like just the skeleton, what do you think this is? Look at that arm. It's almost as long as their own body, and their legs too.
And this uniqueness is also seen in another Cenozoic family that was in some ways a blend of two carnivores that today are still dominant animals.
Wolves?
The bear and the dog. And
Oh,
this combo
dog.
resulted in the group we now refer to as the Amphicyonidae. However, based off of their traits and, frankly, their appearance, they are commonly and aptly called the bear dogs. Being even more ancient than the Chalicotheriums, this family of mammalian predators first appeared in North America during the Middle Eocene some 45 million years ago, and becoming among the first lineages of carnivorans to reach large sizes. And one of the first genera we know of is the Daphoenus, which range from the size of just a house cat to around a small wolf. Now, this guy was a predator, but it was also an omnivore, who had a generalistic diet and lifestyle comparable to that of the extant golden jackal. And because of its size and build, this guy was one of the bear dogs that didn't really match the name as much as its other later relatives.
I mean, if we're talking about today's standards, it's not small. It doesn't look small, but another thing that I want to point out is that when we're looking at it in the lens of these type of videos where they're introducing you to this prehistoric creature that most don't know about, it feels almost perfect, unbeatable strategy, you know what I mean? So my point is, other than their closest relative nowadays, I would actually like to know how they went extinct, or at least the hypothesis. I don't know, maybe I'm weird for that, but I just thought it is very interesting to learn how animals are evolving and to look at the difference between their closest relatives that we have today and what they were, what type they are back then, and the difference between their survival strategy living under a completely different environment. To me, that is very interesting.
Who would ultimately grow larger and more intimidating, becoming in many cases apex predators capable of killing whatever they wanted. And this was really seen when the subfamily, the Amphicyonidae, emerged, who were not only among the larger of their kind, but also really making their nickname proud. From the dog side, they took elongated limbs, longer snouts, and more comparable dentition, while from the bear side, they had similar sizes and a fairly similar feet stance as well. Across this subfamily, some did lean more towards dog traits and other bear traits, but in the end, none
Makes
of them
sense.
were either or, as again, this was a separate group. Yet, what is interesting is that they are actually distant evolutionary cousins to both. And as you can probably imagine, taking the best of both worlds from dogs and bears and then combining them together made the bear dogs a truly nightmarish group of predators.
Here's what I'm saying, right? When we're doing explanations, we're like, oh, we're having the best of both worlds so that it makes it terrifying. But in my mind, they didn't survive. Dog did. The wolves did. The bear did. Not the bear dog. But hey, that's the interesting part of evolution, right? You can never be sure about how it happened. There's just way too much variables to consider. But again, I'm completely ignorant when it comes to these stuff. It's just interesting to think about.
The biggest members seem to be able to grow to be between 550 kilograms and 773 kilograms, or 1,200 pounds to 1,700 pounds. So in other words, over half a ton, and
So,
fairly similar to the size seen in very
bear-sized.
large Kodiak bears.
Yeah.
And so, with all this wrapped up into one package, these bear dogs were highly efficient machines and, in some ways, the kings of their environments, leading to a reign that would essentially last for over 30 million years. And their design was, well, so good that after a point, they didn't really change all that much because, I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it. However, with that said, you're probably wondering, well, why aren't they here today? And that's a great question.
Yeah.
It also comes with a quite repeated answer, and that's climate change, habitat loss, and competition, with them essentially not being able to adapt quick enough to a changing world, and thus they died out about 5 million years ago.
Why are these animals that were so successful, despite their numbers, they were not able to adapt fast enough? Leviathan, like Megalodon, these are all very successful predators that are dominating their own ecosystem. No? Yeah, how are crocodiles still here? How are they still here, man?
So apparently, when you are unique like this, it can ultimately become a crutch. And we again see this with a far older hybrid-like animal that was perhaps an even stranger combo than either the bear dogs or the Chalicotheriums. And this was the Tanystropheus.
What the fuck?
When you first get a good look at this extremely strange creature, you probably immediately think, oh, that's just a plesiosaur.
Yeah.
But no, this prehistoric creature was not one of our favorite extinct icons, and was in fact even older, having evolved during the early Triassic period. Now, as some of you may know, the Triassic period is already well known for creating some very funky creatures. But Tanystropheus, well, that guy was weird even for the time, as it was in some ways an animal that you would get if you combined a plesiosaur with a giraffe. And now you may be thinking, well, a plesiosaur alone is kind of the same.
Yeah.
Yet, the two are very fundamentally different. You see, the plesiosaurs were a fully aquatic group whose neck was designed to infiltrate shoals of fish from a distance. And their long necks, while mighty in the water, lacked the skeletal or muscular support to do much on land. And for this reason alone, dropping one on land wouldn't just be messed up, it would also be a certain death sentence.
Oh, break their
The
neck.
Tanystropheus, on the other hand, would be just fine, as its evolutionary design did not confine it to the water.
What?
As its neck seemed to have been extremely stiff, a bit like a giraffe's, and well supported by bone and muscles. And with these features combined, it might just have been able to keep this large structure somewhat elevated while on land, especially since the neck was light for its size and stabilized by powerful tendons. So obviously this had some benefits, but at the same time, because of its rigidity, it also meant that this creature could not bend its neck like a snake, with its flexibility being again more comparable to a giraffe's. It was thought that the Tanystropheus would have spent nearly all of its time in water, but because its limbs and tail lack many swimming adaptations,
Yeah, it looks like a modern day reptile. I'm struggling to think of what they do with their long neck. To pick out small fish on the shore? Between rock crevices? They also don't seem that big, so what are they using their long neck for?
it's now thought to have been a semi-aquatic animal that was capable of chilling out on land or in the water. And let me tell you, seeing this reptile on land would have been quite a strange sight, as it was no small fry, with the largest specimens measuring up to 6 meters or
Never
20 feet
mind.
long, with the necks alone sometimes accounting for half of that total length.
They're fucking huge.
Unsurprisingly, given its very weird anatomy, its lifestyle has often been a source of fascination, not only because it was semi-aquatic, but also because it was a carnivore, which we know thanks to its thin conical teeth that were in some cases interlocked, making them similar to those of a plesiosaur, and suggesting that they were used to catch slimy, wriggly prey like fish and cephalopods.
Oh, yeah.
But how exactly did it catch prey is a slippery subject. For example, some think it swam after fish. Others think it lowered its neck over water like a fishing rod.
This is what I think it did. Think about it. They have claws, right? I mean, technically, if they were able to hold their breath long enough, they could also just stay in the water, gripping onto something, and just ambush prey with their long necks. That would also make sense, no?
And then a few even believe that it did these things, and then on top of that, hunted animals on land as well. Whatever the case though, this tactic seemed to have worked pretty well, as the creature is known in great numbers from a variety of different formations that span across Europe, Asia, and North America, while the genus alone ended up existing for 10 million years.
Wow.
And though far larger than its relatives, it was a member of the Tanystrophiidae, who all had similar appearances, and as a whole were fairly abundant creatures during the whole Triassic. But alas, they all would go extinct eventually, including the Tanystropheus. And in the case of it, one thing that might have harmed its chances at long-term survival was a vulnerability that its design created. You see, Having such a vulnerable body part that was not necessarily out of the way like a giraffe's very tall head would be,
Yeah.
led to the Tanystropheus being highly preyed upon. And we do see that many specimens had fatal devastating bites to the neck that in some cases essentially decapitated them.
Yeah, again, if you just look at this, like, how are they going to escape in the water? That's why I think fishing makes more sense, since they're also reptiles, right? So cold-blooded. Because I don't think someone like this can move that fast. Because look at their legs. It just doesn't seem like they are powerful enough to propel themselves, including the neck, to hunt. You know what I mean?
With some suspected predators being Erythrosaurus, Ichthyosaurus, and the Helveticosaurus. And so ultimately, while they were successful in the Triassic, they would not see the Jurassic. And such a fate seems quite common for many of the Triassic's strange creations, including another fusion of animals that had a bit to do with the most famous of all extinct creatures, the T-Rex.
T-Rex?
However, this mashup is not a dinosaur,
fuck?
but instead a distantly related archosaur form, the Erythrosuchus. This monstrosity of an animal first shows up in the fossil record about 249 million years ago, right after the Permian stage had ended. When you see the skeleton of this animal, it's quite easy to figure out the gap that's being filled, seeing that this thing basically looks like a T-Rex and a terrestrial croc and a baby together, resulting in a bobble-like head built for absolute carnage. And in fact, when it was first discovered, its head was so giant and theropod-like that even the paleontologists who found it thought they had unearthed a new theropod similar to the Rex. But once they started finding more remains, they realized that nope, this was in reality a very strange four-legged.
It looks like a bubblehead Komodo dragon. Looking at the skull, it does kind of look like a T-Rex. Interesting time period.
And when I say oversized, I am not exaggerating, as the skull of the Erythrosuchus alone was possibly up to 1 meter or 3 feet long, while then its total length was just 4 meters or 20 feet, which also means that this 2-ton giant had a skull 25% of its total length.
2 ton? That thing weighs 2 ton? How dense is this thing? Look at the size comparison. It's not that huge. I mean, it's big, but god damn. But why? How does this make sense? Can they gallop? How do they even hunt with the big head of theirs weighing them down? Yeah, this is the first one that actually makes 0 sense to me.
And sadly for the animals that lived alongside, this enormous thinker was not so it could eat greens to its heart's content, with its preferred food usually being red and bloody, as the Erythrosuchus was the pinnacle of apex predators during its heyday, with a jaw being filled by dozens of razor-sharp, large conical teeth that were also serrated and curved. That head of theirs was designed to pack in as much muscles as humanly possible, or as archosaurally possible, to allow them to snap those killing blocks with deadly power.
I mean,
that
you
might
can
have been similar
tell.
to the bite forces of modern large crocodiles. This essentially allowed them to eat whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. In fact, because of its head and tools, it's thought that the Erythrosuchus became a hyper-carnivore, meaning over 70% of its diet was meat.
Why do you have to trauma like this, man? Oh, god damn it.
That also allowed it to reign across the Karoo of Triassic South Africa, meaning this four-legged T-Rex was likely hunting animals such as the Convey, Diatomodon, and even a fan favorite, the Lystrosaurus. But putting all of your points, so to speak, into a supermouth does have some drawbacks as well.
Yeah.
For starters, its massive head needed extensive support to keep it up, especially since it was not a mega giant like the real Rex. And as a result, it had a short, stout neck that limited its ability to move its head around. And then on top of this, the head also made it not the fastest predator around, forcing it to rely on ambushes to catch prey, who typically then also had to be on the slower side. And perhaps it's because of these limitations that the Erythrosuchus eventually went extinct, unable to compete with the more nimble, agile predators.
It kind of works against each other. It doesn't even look like they have a particularly powerful, at least hind legs, for them to, burst into action, so to speak. Because the biggest benefit of having a powerful jaw is to deliver a very powerful bite. But if you can't catch up to anything, what are you gonna do? It's for sure a weird one. Yeah. But other than that, does your size also contribute to the inability to be more adaptive? Because if you're smaller, right, you can technically pivot to eating something you're not that used to, where you can still survive on a slightly different diet. And maybe that would lead to you surviving long enough to adapt to a new environment. But if you're that huge, while being an active predator where you have a very specific prey that you're looking for, that you're hunting for, when they cease to exist, you don't really have much choice. So yeah, I feel like animals growing smaller and smaller makes more sense. But yeah, it's always interesting to learn stuff like this, to see what exists back then and to just, I guess, ponder the wonders of how evolution works. It fascinates me. It really does. But anyways, the link to the original video will be down in the description. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time.